The wind cut through the thin walls of the small cabin like ice-cold knives. Catherine pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to stop the bitter cold from seeping into her bones. Outside, snow fell in thick sheets, covering everything in white silence. The fire in the small stove had died hours ago, and she had no more wood to burn. She pressed her hand against her swollen belly and felt the baby move inside her. Any day now, she thought. Maybe any hour. The thought both excited and terrified her. It had been 3 months since the mine accident took her husband Patrick. 3 months since the foreman came to her door with his hat in his hands and that terrible look in his eyes. 3 months since her world fell apart. "I'm sorry, Mrs. O'Brien," the foreman had said. "The tunnel collapsed. We tried everything, but there were no survivors." Since then, Catherine had watched their small savings disappear like snow in spring rain. First went the money for food, then the money for coal to keep warm. Now she was down to her last few coins and winter was getting worse. The baby kicked hard, making her gasp. She rubbed the spot and whispered, "Easy there, little one. I know you're ready to come out, but maybe wait a little longer, just until I figure out what we're going to do." But the baby had other plans. The first pain hit her like a lightning strike. Catherine doubled over, gripping the edge of the wooden table. She had helped other women give birth back in Ireland, so she knew what was happening. The baby was coming, ready or not. For the next 6 hours, Catherine fought through the pain alone in that cold cabin. No doctor, no midwife, no neighbor woman to help. Just her and the storm outside, and the baby who wanted to be born. When her daughter finally arrived, Catherine cried with both joy and heartbreak. The baby was perfect. Tiny fingers, tiny toes, a little button nose red from the cold. But she was so small, and the cabin was so cold, and Catherine had no idea how she was going to keep this precious little life alive. She wrapped the baby in every piece of cloth she could find. Old shirts, torn blankets, even her wedding dress that she had saved in a trunk. Still, the baby shivered in her arms. "What am I going to do with you, sweet girl?" Catherine whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I have no food for myself, no milk for you, no way to keep you warm." For 3 days, Catherine tried everything she could think of. She knocked on neighbors' doors begging for help, but everyone was struggling through the harsh winter. Some people were kind but had nothing to give. Others just closed their doors. She went to the church, but Father McKinnon was away visiting the next town. She tried the general store, but Mr. Henderson said he couldn't give away food for free, even to a woman with a baby. The baby grew weaker each day. Catherine could see it, in the way her little daughter's cries became softer, the way she slept more and ate less. The truth hit Catherine like a punch to the stomach. Her baby was dying, and she couldn't do anything to stop it. On the 4th night, as the wind howled outside and snow piled higher against the windows, Catherine made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She had heard stories from other women about babies who were left at churches or orphanages, babies who found good homes with families who could take care of them. Maybe, she thought, if she left her daughter somewhere safe, someone would find her and give her the life Catherine couldn't provide. The Salt River ran just a mile from town. Even in winter, people sometimes went there to get water or to cross to the other side. If she left the baby there in a basket by the water's edge, someone was bound to find her quickly. It was a desperate plan born from a desperate heart, but Catherine couldn't think of anything else. She spent the night making a small basket from twigs and lining it with her softest cloth. She wrote a letter with shaking hands. "Please take care of my baby girl. Her name is Mary Catherine O'Brien. I cannot keep her alive, but maybe you can. She deserves better than I can give her. Please love her for me." As dawn broke gray and cold, Catherine dressed her baby in every warm thing she had. She kissed the tiny forehead and whispered all the love she had into that small ear. "I'm sorry, my darling, I'm so sorry. But maybe this way you'll have a chance." The walk to the river felt like the longest mile of Catherine's life. The baby slept peacefully in the basket, unaware that her mother's heart was breaking with every step. The salt river was running high from melted snow upstream. The water moved fast and dark between ice-covered banks. Catherine found a spot where the current was slower, where the basket would stay safe until someone found it. She placed the basket gently on a flat rock near the water's edge, protected from the wind by some large stones. Then she tucked the letter inside the blankets next to her sleeping daughter. "Please, God," she prayed, "let someone kind find her soon. Let her have the life I can't give her." Catherine kissed her daughter one last time, breathing in that sweet baby smell she knew she would remember forever. Then she forced herself to walk away, even though every instinct screamed at her to turn around and take her baby back. She made it about 50 yards before she heard the sound that stopped her heart, the crack of ice and the splash of water. Catherine spun around to see the basket bobbing in the river current. A piece of ice had shifted, pushing the basket into the water. Her baby was floating away, disappearing into the dark morning mist that rose from the river. "No!" Catherine screamed, running back toward the water. "No, no, no!" She crashed through, the shallow ice at the river's edge, the cold water hitting her like 1,000 needles. But the current was too strong, and the basket was already too far away. Catherine watched in horror as it disappeared around a bend in the river. She fell to her knees in the icy water, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. She had wanted to save her daughter, but instead she had killed her. She had sent her own baby to die in the cold river water. Catherine crawled back to the shore and collapsed in the snow. The cold didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered anymore. She had lost Patrick to the mine, and now she had lost their daughter to her own desperation. She lay there as the sun came up, as the snow continued to fall, as the river kept flowing like it hadn't just swallowed the most precious thing in her world. She wanted to die there in the snow. She wanted the cold to take her too, so she wouldn't have to live with what she had done. But the body has a strong will to live, even when the heart doesn't want to. Eventually, Catherine's survival instincts forced her to get up, to walk back to her cold cabin, to keep breathing even though she didn't want to. Back in her empty cabin, Catherine collapsed on her bed and cried until she had no tears left. The baby's blanket still smelled like her. The letter Catherine had written but never sent still sat on the table. Everything reminded her of the daughter she had held for 4 days and then lost forever. Days turned into weeks. Catherine barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke to anyone. The other women in town whispered about her, how she had been pregnant and now suddenly wasn't, how she walked around like a ghost, how she stared at the river every time she passed it. Some people guessed what had happened, but no one said anything directly. In those days, desperate women sometimes made desperate choices, and people understood even if they didn't approve. Catherine found work cleaning houses for the wealthier families in town. It paid little, but it was enough to keep her alive. She moved through her days like she was sleepwalking, doing what she had to do to survive but feeling nothing inside. Every night, she dreamed about the basket floating away down the river. Every morning, she woke up hoping it had all been a nightmare. But her empty arms and her aching heart reminded her that it was all too real. Spring came and the snow melted, and the river ran even higher with runoff from the mountains. Catherine would sometimes walk to the spot where she had left her daughter and wonder where the river had taken her. Had someone found her? Had she suffered? Did she call out for her mother in those final moments? These questions ate at Catherine's soul, but she had no answers. All she could do was keep living with the weight of what she had done, and hope that somehow, somewhere, her baby had found peace. She never spoke her daughter's name again. She never told anyone what really happened that morning by the river. She carried her secret like a stone in her heart, heavy and cold and sharp. But Catherine didn't know that sometimes the river gives back what it takes away. She didn't know that miracles can happen even on the darkest days. She didn't know that her daughter's story was far from over. The river had carried the basket away, yes, but it had also carried it toward a destiny that neither Catherine nor her baby could have imagined. A destiny that would turn a moment of desperation into something extraordinary. Miles downstream, where the river wound through Apache territory, other eyes were watching the water. Other hands would soon reach out to save what Catherine thought was lost forever. But Catherine didn't know any of this. All she knew was the crushing weight of grief and guilt, and the terrible knowledge that she had thrown away the most precious thing in her life. She would live with that pain for 15 long years before she learned the truth about what really happened that morning when the river took her daughter away. The morning mist hung low over the salt river as Ayanna made her way carefully down the rocky bank. She moved like a shadow between the winter-bare trees, her moccasined feet finding secure holds on the ice-slicked stones. In her woven basket, she carried the tools of her trade: sharp knives for cutting bark, small leather pouches for seeds and roots, and strips of soft deer hide for wrapping the most delicate plants. Ayanna was the medicine woman for her band of Apache people. She knew every plant that grew along the river, every root that could heal sickness, every bark that could ease pain. This morning she was looking for willow bark to help old Nalnish with his aching joints. The winter had been hard on everyone, but especially on the elders. As she knelt by the water's edge to cut strips of willow bark, Ayanna heard something that made her freeze. It was faint, almost lost in the sound of running water, but unmistakable once she focused on it. A baby's cry. Ayanna stood slowly, her dark eyes scanning the misty river. The sound came again, weak and desperate. She followed it downstream, moving carefully over the wet rocks and patches of ice. There, caught in a tangle of dried reeds and driftwood, was a small basket, and from inside that basket came the thin wail of an infant. Ayanna's heart pounded as she waded into the shallow water. The basket was wedged tight between two fallen branches, spinning slowly in the current but held secure. Ice had formed around the edges where the water moved more slowly. She lifted the basket carefully, afraid of what she might find inside. The crying had stopped, and Ayanna feared she might be too late. But when she pulled back the soggy blankets, two bright blue eyes stared up at her. The baby was alive, though her lips were blue with cold, and her tiny body shivered uncontrollably. "Little one," Ayanna whispered in Apache, "how did you come to be in the river?" She pressed the baby against her warm chest and hurried back toward her village. As she walked, she examined the child more closely. This was clearly a white baby. Pale, skin, light hair, blue eyes. But how had she ended up floating down the salt river? Ayanna found a piece of wet paper tucked deep in the blankets. The words were smeared by water, but she could make out parts of it. "Please take care. Cannot keep her alive. Deserves better." The picture became clear. Some desperate mother had left this baby hoping someone would find her and care for her. But something had gone wrong, and the basket had ended up in the river instead. "You should be dead, little one," Ayanna murmured as she climbed the path toward her village. The cold water, the time in the river, no food. You should not have survived. This is not natural. This is sacred. When Ayanna reached her village, people gathered around to see what she had found. The Apache were not strangers to finding lost or abandoned children. In their tradition, any child in need was welcomed, regardless of where they came from. But finding a living baby in a river in the middle of winter, that was extraordinary. Nalnish, the band's elder and spiritual leader, examined the baby carefully. He was a man of maybe 60 winters, with long gray braids and eyes that seemed to see into the spirit world. He had guided their people through many difficult times and was known for his wisdom and his connection to the sacred powers. "Bring her to my lodge," he said quietly. "This child needs ceremony." In Nalnish's lodge, with a warm fire burning and sweet grass smoking in the corners, the old man held the baby and spoke to the spirits. He was quiet for a long time, just holding the child and listening to something only he could hear. "This one," he finally said, "was touched by the water spirits. They carried her to us for a purpose. She did not come to us by accident." Ayanna had been warming milk from one of the goats, and now she carefully fed the hungry baby with a small piece of soft hide dipped in the warm liquid. The baby drank eagerly, her tiny hands grasping at Ayanna's fingers. "What should we call her?" asked Desba, one of the other women who had gathered to see the river baby. Nalnish watched the child drink and considered the question. In Apache tradition, names were important. They reflected not just what a person was, but what they might become. She survived the river, he said. She is strong. We will call her Bidzil. She is strong. But privately, Nalnish had another name for the baby. As he held her that first day, she had made soft sounds that reminded him of something his own grandmother had sung to him long ago. Ancient songs, sacred songs, melodies that connected the people to the spirit world. In his heart, he called her his sacred song. The next days were crucial for baby Bidzil's survival. Hayana barely left her side, feeding her warm goat's milk every few hours, keeping her wrapped in soft furs, watching for signs of sickness from her time in the cold river. But the baby was strong, just like her name promised. She grew healthy and alert, her blue eyes following movement around the lodge, her tiny fists waving when she was hungry or wanted attention. The other children in the village were fascinated by the white baby. They would gather around when Ayana brought her outside, touching her pale skin gently and giggling at her light hair. But to them, she wasn't strange or different. She was just Bidzil, the baby who came from the river. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Bidzil became fully part of the community. Different women took turns caring for her when Ayana was gathering medicines. The older children helped watch her when she was awake and playful. Even the men of the village, usually focused on hunting and protecting the band, would stop to smile at the river baby. Nalnish spent more time with Bidzil than anyone expected. Often, people would find the old spiritual leader holding her by the fire, humming ancient melodies under his breath. He said the child had come to them for a reason, and he was determined to understand what that reason might be. She listens to the songs, he told Ayana one evening as they watched Bidzil sleep peacefully in her cradleboard. When I sing the old songs, she becomes very still, very quiet, like she understands something in the music. Ayana nodded. She had noticed it too. Most babies cried during the long ceremonies, but Bidzil always seemed calm when the singing began. It was as if the ancient Apache melodies spoke to something deep in her spirit. As the seasons changed, Bidzil grew from a tiny infant into a healthy, happy baby. She learned to sit up, to crawl, to pull herself upright by grabbing onto the lodge poles. Her first word was ma, not for mother, but for mai, the Apache word for coyote, because she loved watching the wild dogs that sometimes came near the village. The other children taught her simple words in Apache. Soon she was babbling in the only language she knew, pointing at things and saying ish for horse, ga for rabbit, bill for water. To Bidzil, Apache was not a foreign language. It was simply how people talked. When she took her first steps, the whole village celebrated. Nalnish declared that her walking ceremony would be especially important because she was a child of two worlds, born to one people, but raised by another. She will walk between worlds her whole life, he predicted. This gives her special power but also special challenges. By her second winter in the village, Bidzil was no longer the river baby or the white child. She was simply one of the children, playing with the others, learning the same lessons, eating the same food, sleeping under the same stars. But Ayana never forgot how she had found Bidzil that misty morning by the river. Sometimes when she watched the little girl play, she wondered about the woman who had written that desperate letter. Did she think about her daughter? Did she wonder if her baby had survived? Ayana hoped that wherever that mother was, she had found some peace. She hoped the woman could somehow know that her desperate act had not ended in tragedy, but in a miracle. Her daughter was not only alive, she was loved, cherished, and growing strong among people who considered her a sacred gift. Nalnish often said that the spirits worked in mysterious ways. Sometimes what looked like the worst thing that could happen was actually the beginning of something beautiful. A baby thrown into a cold river to die had instead been delivered to people who would raise her with love and wisdom. But even Nalnish, wise as he was, could not see everything that lay ahead for little Bidzil. He could not know that her story of living between two worlds was just beginning. He could not predict the day when her birth mother would come looking for her, or the difficult choices that would follow. For now, though, Bidziel was simply a happy Apache child who happened to have blue eyes and light skin. She was Ayana's daughter in every way that mattered. She was Nelnish's sacred song, the child who hummed along with ancient melodies. She was home. The river had carried her away from one life and delivered her to another. And in the warm lodges of her Apache family, surrounded by love and acceptance, Bidziel grew strong and confident, never knowing that Bidziel was 15 years old when she first realized she looked different from everyone else in her world. It happened on a warm summer morning when she knelt by the river to wash her face before the day's work began. The water was still and clear like a perfect mirror, and for the first time in her life she really looked at her reflection. Blue eyes stared back at her, not the warm brown eyes of her Apache mother Ayana, or the deep black eyes of her spiritual grandfather Nelnish. Her skin was pale even after years of desert sun, unlike the rich bronze of her family and friends. Her hair, when it caught the light, showed golden streaks that no one else in her village had. "You are thinking too hard again," came a voice behind her. Bidziel turned to see her closest friend Kanti, approaching with a water basket balanced on her hip. Kanti was her age, with the classic Apache features, high cheekbones, dark eyes, and long black hair that gleamed like obsidian in the morning light. "I was just looking," Bidziel said, still staring at the water. Kanti knelt beside her and peered into the river. "Looking at what?" "I see the same Bidziel who beat me in the racing contest yesterday, and who makes better pottery than anyone under 20 winters." Bidziel smiled despite her troubled thoughts. Kanti always knew how to make her feel better. They had grown up together, learned to ride horses together, practiced archery together. In every way that mattered, they were sisters. But lately, as traders and travelers occasionally passed through their territory, Bidziel had begun to notice things. The way some white people looked at her when they saw her dressed in Apache clothing and speaking Apache words. The confusion in their eyes, as if they couldn't understand what they were seeing. "Kanti," she said quietly, "do you ever think about why I look so different from everyone else?" Her friend was quiet for a moment, filling her water basket. "My grandmother told me once that the spirits paint people in many different colors, just like they paint the sunset. Some sunsets are red and orange, some are purple and gold. All of them are beautiful." It was a kind answer, but it didn't satisfy the questions growing in Bidziel's mind. She knew the story of how Ayana had found her by the river as a baby. Everyone in the village knew it, but recently she had begun to wonder about the people who came before that day. Who were the parents who had made her? What was their story? These thoughts occupied her mind more and more as the days passed. She found herself studying every white trader or settler who came through their territory, wondering if any of them might share her features, her coloring. But none ever showed any sign of recognizing her. Nalnish noticed her distraction during one of their regular teaching sessions. The old spiritual leader had been training Bidziel in the healing arts since she was small, saying that she had special gifts for understanding both plants and people. "Your mind is elsewhere today, sacred song," he said, using the special name he had called her since childhood. They were sitting in his lodge, sorting dried herbs and roots. "What troubles you?" Bidziel set down the bundle of sage she had been examining. "Grandfather," she said, using the respectful term for elders, "you have always said I came to you for a purpose. But what if my purpose lies somewhere else? What if I am meant to understand both worlds, the Apache world and the white world?" Nalnish was quiet for a long time, his weathered hands continuing to sort through the medicines. Finally he spoke. "When I was a young man," he said, "I had a vision. I saw a bridge made of light stretching between two mountaintops. On one mountain stood our people, on the other stood the white people. The bridge was empty. No one could cross from one side to the other." He paused, looking directly at Bidziel with his knowing eyes. "But then I saw a figure walking on that bridge, someone who belonged to both mountains and to neither. Someone who could help people understand each other." He smiled. "I think you know who that figure was." Bidziel felt a shiver run down her spine. "You think that's why I'm here?" To be some kind of bridge? I think, Nalnish said carefully, that your path will become clear when the time is right. But yes, I believe you have a special role to play in the changing world around us. His words proved prophetic sooner than either of them expected. 3 weeks later, a group of white settlers arrived at their territory with a broken wagon wheel and a sick child. Usually, such groups would be directed to move on quickly, but the child, a little boy of maybe 6 years, was burning with fever and could not travel. Ayana was away gathering medicines in the high country, so the responsibility fell to Bidzil to treat the sick child. She was nervous but determined to help. The settlers were suspicious at first when they saw a blue-eyed girl dressed in Apache clothing approaching their camp. But when Bidzil began to speak to them in English, words she had learned from traders, over the years their confusion grew. "How do you speak our language?" asked the boy's mother, a thin woman with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. "I learn from traders," Bidzil said simply, her English still imperfect but understandable. "I help your son. He very sick, but I have medicine." The family exchanged uncertain glances. They needed help, but trusting an Apache medicine woman, even one who looked like them, went against everything they had been taught about the savage Indians. But love for their child overcame their prejudices. They allowed Bidzil to examine the boy and prepare her remedies. For 3 days, Bidzil tended the sick child. She brewed teas from willow bark to bring down his fever, made poultices from desert plants to draw out the infection, and sang soft, Apache lullabies to help him sleep. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. The boy's eyes cleared and he sat up asking for water. His parents wept with relief. "How can we thank you?" the father asked Bidzil. "You saved our son's life." "No thanks needed," she replied. "All children are precious. Apache children, white children, all same to the spirits." But as the family prepared to leave, the mother pulled Bidzil aside. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "You look like us, but you live with them. How is this possible?" Bidzil chose her words carefully. "Sometimes River brings gifts to different people. I am Apache now, but I remember other words, other ways. Maybe spirits want me to understand both." The woman stared at her for a long moment. "There are people in the settlements who would be very interested to meet you. People who think Apache and whites can never live together peacefully. You prove that's not true." After the settlers left, Bidzil found herself thinking constantly about the woman's words. She had always known she was different, but now she began to understand what that difference might mean. Over the following months, more white travelers passed through their territory. Word had spread about the blue-eyed Apache girl who could speak English and had saved a settler child. Some came seeking her medical help. Others came just to see this curiosity for themselves. Each encounter taught Bidzil more about the white world she had been born into but never known. She learned about their cities and their customs, their fears and their dreams. She began to see that many white people were just as scared and confused about Apache people as Apache people were about them. But she also saw the growing tension between the two worlds. White settlers were moving into Apache territory in larger numbers. The U.S. government was making demands that the Apache move to reservations. Young Apache warriors talked increasingly of fighting back. Bidzil found herself caught in the middle of these growing conflicts. When Apache raiders attacked a white settlement, some whites looked at her with suspicion, as if her pale skin made her responsible. When white soldiers threatened Apache villages, some of her own people wondered if her mixed heritage made her sympathetic to their enemies. It was a lonely position, belonging fully to neither world while trying to understand both. The situation came to a head when a group of U.S. soldiers arrived at their village, demanding to speak with the leaders about relocating to a reservation. The Apache leaders were ready to refuse and fight if necessary. The soldiers were prepared to use force. Into this tense standoff stepped Bidzil. "I will speak for my people," she announced, walking between the two groups. Both sides stared at her in surprise. To the soldiers, she looked like a white woman dressed as an Apache. To the Apache, she was their own Bidzil, but speaking words they didn't understand. For 2 hours, Bidzil translated not just words, but meanings. When the soldier captain spoke of pacifying the region, she explained to her people that he meant stopping the raids and violence. When Nalnish spoke of keeping the sacred places, she helped the soldiers understand that certain lands held deep spiritual meaning. She didn't solve all the problems that day, but she prevented a battle. Both sides agreed to continue talking, instead of fighting. That night, as Bidzil sat by her lodge fire, Kanti came to find her. "You did something very brave today," her friend said, "and very dangerous. Some people will not like that you can speak to both sides." Bidzil nodded. She had already thought of this. But if I don't speak, who will? Who else understands both languages, both ways of thinking? Just be careful, sister, Kanti warned. Walking between two worlds means you might fall into the space between them. As Bidzil looked up at the stars that night, she thought about Nalnish's vision of the bridge between two mountains. She was beginning to. 15 years had passed since Catherine O'Brien knelt in the snow by the Salt River and watched her baby daughter disappear into the dark water. 15 years of guilt so heavy it felt like carrying stones in her chest. 15 years of wondering if she could have found another way, if she could have been stronger, if she could have saved them both. Catherine had survived, though sometimes she wondered why. She had found work as a seamstress in the growing town of Phoenix, her steady hands and careful stitches earning her enough money to live simply but safely. She had a small room behind Mrs. Henderson's dress shop, where she worked long hours mending clothes and creating new garments for the town's more prosperous women. But no amount of work could quiet the voice in her head that whispered accusations in the dark hours of the night. "Murderer," it said. "You killed your own child. You threw away the most precious gift God ever gave you." She had tried to make peace with what she had done. She attended church every Sunday, praying for forgiveness she felt she didn't deserve. She put money in the collection plate for the orphanage, hoping somehow to balance the scales. She was kind to every child she met, as if caring for other people's children could somehow make up for failing her own. But nothing helped. The guilt followed her like a shadow, and the questions never stopped. What had happened to baby Mary Catherine in those terrible moments in the river? Had she suffered? Had she cried for her mother? Had she understood somehow that she had been abandoned? Then, on a hot summer day in 1900, everything changed. Catherine was delivering a finished dress to Mrs. Rebecca Fowler, one of her regular customers. Mrs. Fowler was married to a man who owned several businesses in town and liked to gossip about everything that happened within 100 miles. "You'll never guess what William heard from those cattle buyers who came through last week," Mrs. Fowler said as Catherine carefully hung the new dress in her wardrobe. Catherine made polite listening sounds while checking the hem one final time. "They were talking about the strangest thing," Mrs. Fowler continued. "Apparently there's a white woman living with the Apache somewhere south of here, can you imagine? A white woman choosing to live like a savage." Catherine's hands stilled on the fabric. "A white woman?" "That's what they said. Young woman. Maybe 20 years old with blue eyes and light hair. But she speaks Apache like she was born to it, dresses like them, acts like them. The cattle buyers said some of the Apache call her their medicine woman." The room seemed to spin around Catherine. She gripped the edge of the wardrobe to steady herself. How long has she been with them?" "Oh, since she was a baby, according to the story. The Apache found her somehow and raised her as their own. Isn't that the most peculiar thing you ever heard?" Catherine's knees went weak. She managed to finish her business with Mrs. Fowler and walk calmly back to the dress shop, but inside, her heart was pounding like thunder. A white woman with blue eyes and light hair, about 20 years old, raised by Apache since she was a baby. Found by Apache near the river. Could it be possible? Could her Mary Catherine have survived that terrible morning? Could the river have carried her to safety instead of death? That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, trying to convince herself she was being foolish. Thousands of babies had blue eyes and light hair. Just because there was a white woman among the Apache didn't mean it was her daughter. But the timing was right. The age was right. And where else would Apache have found a white baby in the middle of the territory? For weeks, Catherine investigated. Every rumor, every story, every whisper about the white Apache woman. She spoke carefully to traders, to cattle buyers, to anyone who traveled through the southern territories. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. The woman's name was Bidzil, which meant, "She is strong," in Apache. She had been found, as an infant, by an Apache medicine woman named Ayana. She was known for her healing skills and her ability to speak both Apache and English. Some people called her a bridge between the white and Apache worlds, and she had been found by a river. Catherine's hands shook as she counted her savings. She had been careful with money for 15 years, and she had enough to pay for a guide and supplies for a journey south. She had to know. She had to see this woman for herself. If it wasn't her daughter, she would know quickly enough. If it was, Catherine didn't dare hope too much, but she had to try. Finding a guide willing to take a lone woman into Apache territory was not easy. Most men refused outright, saying it was too dangerous. But Catherine finally found an old mountain man named Jake Morrison, who agreed to take her, partly because she paid him well, and partly because he was curious about her story. "You sure about this, ma'am?" Jake asked as they prepared to leave. "Phoenix. Apache country ain't no place for a lady, especially one traveling alone." "I'm sure," Catherine said, though her stomach was tied in knots. "I have to find her." The journey south took 5 days through desert country that seemed to stretch forever. Catherine had never been so far from civilization, never seen landscape so wild and empty. Cactus and scrub brush stretched to the horizon under a burning sky. At night, coyotes howled in the distance, and Catherine lay awake wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But Jake proved to be a good guide. He knew the water holes and the safe camping spots. He also knew how to approach Apache territory without getting them both killed. "The thing about Apache," he explained as they neared the area where the white woman was said to live, "is they ain't naturally hostile, but they are naturally careful. They'll know we're coming long before we see them. Best thing is to make camp somewhere visible and wait for them to come to us." So they made camp by a small stream and waited. Catherine spent the time trying to imagine what she would say if the woman really was her daughter. How do you explain to someone that you threw them in a river to die? How do you ask forgiveness for something so terrible? On the second day of waiting, they came. 3 Apache riders appeared on a ridge overlooking their camp. They sat perfectly still for several minutes, just watching. Then one of them rode down toward them while the other 2 remained on guard. The Apache man who approached was middle-aged with long, graying hair and intelligent eyes. He spoke some English, enough to communicate. "You look for someone," he said. It wasn't a question. Catherine's mouth was dry as dust, but she managed to speak. "Yes, I'm looking for a white woman who lives with your people. Her name is Bidzil." The Apache man studied her carefully. "Why you look for Bidzil?" This was the moment Catherine had been dreading and hoping for. I believe she might be my daughter. My daughter who was lost 15 years ago." Something changed in the man's expression. Not suspicion exactly, but a new kind of attention. "You wait here," he said. "I bring Bidzil. If she want to see you, she come. If not, you go away." Catherine nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. The Apache man rode back to his companions, and all 3 disappeared over the ridge. Catherine and Jake waited through the longest afternoon of Catherine's life. As the sun was setting, painting the desert gold and red, a single rider appeared on the ridge. Catherine shaded her eyes against the glare, trying to make out details. The rider was a woman dressed in Apache clothing, but with something familiar about the way she sat her horse. As she rode closer, Catherine could see light hair braided with feathers, blue eyes that seemed to look right through her, and a face that was somehow both strange and achingly familiar. The woman stopped her horse 10 feet away and sat perfectly, still studying Catherine with those intense blue eyes. Catherine stared back, seeing her own eyes reflected in that face, recognizing the shape of Patrick's nose and the curve of her own mouth. This was her daughter. Her baby, Mary Catherine, grown into a strong and beautiful young woman. "You are Catherine O'Brien," the woman said in English, though with an accent Catherine couldn't quite place. Catherine gasped. "You know me?" "I know your name. It was written on paper in my basket when Ayana found me in the river." The woman's voice was steady, but Catherine could hear something else underneath. Old pain, old questions. "Mary Catherine," Catherine whispered. "My little Mary Catherine." "My name is Bidziel," the woman corrected firmly. "It has been my name for 15 years. They stared at each other across the distance, physical and emotional, that separated them. Catherine wanted to run to her daughter, to hold her, to cry and apologize and try to explain, but something in Bidziel's posture warned her to stay where she was. "Why are you here?" Bidziel asked. Catherine's carefully rehearsed speeches disappeared from her mind. All she could manage was the truth. "I heard there was a white woman living with the Apache. I hoped, I prayed, that it might be you. That you had somehow survived. Survived what you did to me, you mean?" The words hit Catherine like physical blows. "Yes. What I did was terrible. I was desperate and scared, and I thought if someone found you, they could give you a better life than I could." Bidziel's expression didn't change. "You threw me in a river to die." "No," Catherine said desperately. "I put you by the river where someone would find you. The basket wasn't supposed to go in the water. I was..." 2 years had passed since Catherine O'Brien met her daughter by the desert stream. 2 years of carefully building something that was not quite a relationship, but was more than nothing. Catherine had taken a small house in the town of Tucson, close enough to Apache territory to receive occasional news of Bidziel, far enough away to respect her daughter's boundaries. Every few months, Bidziel would ride into town with traded goods or to purchase supplies her people needed. She would visit Catherine's house, drink coffee at the small kitchen table, and share stories of her life. Catherine learned about Apache customs, about the changing seasons in the desert, about the growing pressures her daughter's people faced from an expanding American government. It was during one of these visits that Bidziel brought news that would change everything. "The soldiers came again last week," she said, her usually calm voice tight with worry. "This time they brought papers from Washington, official orders. We have 30 days to move to the San Carlos reservation, or they will use force." Catherine's heart sank. She had heard about San Carlos, a desolate place where the government was trying to concentrate all the Apache bands, regardless of their traditional territories or tribal differences. It was hundreds of miles from the sacred places where Bidziel's people had lived for generations. "Will your band go?" Catherine asked. Bidziel stared into her coffee cup. "The elders are divided. Some say we should fight. Some say we should run, deeper into the mountains where the soldiers cannot follow. A few think we should negotiate, try to find a better solution. What do you think?" "I think," Bidziel said slowly, "that this is the moment Nalnish saw in his vision long ago. The moment when I must truly become a bridge between worlds." Over the next week, Catherine watched her daughter wrestle with an impossible decision. Bidziel had spent her entire adult life serving as an interpreter and mediator between Apache and white communities. But this was different. This was about the survival of everything she held dear. The solution Bidziel finally proposed was so audacious, so risky that even she seemed surprised by her own boldness. "I want to go to the territorial capital," she announced during her next visit with Catherine. "I want to speak directly to the officials in charge. Maybe if they understand what we're really facing, they'll find a better way." Catherine was horrified. "Bidziel, that's dangerous. Phoenix is full of people who hate Apache. They won't see you as a mediator. They'll see you as the enemy." "Not if I have help," Bidziel said, looking directly at her birth mother. "Not if I have someone who can vouch for me, who can help me navigate their world." Catherine understood immediately. "You want me to come with you? I know it's asking a lot. You've built a quiet life here, but you understand both sides now. You know me. You know my people's situation, and you know the white world better than I do." Catherine didn't hesitate. After 15 years of guilt and regret, here was finally something she could do for her daughter, something that might actually help. "Of course I'll come," she said. "When do we leave?" The journey to Phoenix took 3 days. Catherine had arranged meetings with everyone she could think of who might have influence: territorial officials, newspaper editors, prominent businessmen, church leaders. She used every connection she had made during her years as a seamstress, calling in favors from women whose dresses she had sewn, whose confidence she had earned. Bidziel was nervous in a way Catherine had never seen before. In Apache territory, her daughter moved with complete confidence. Here in the white world, surrounded by buildings and crowds and the smell of civilization, she seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "I don't know their rules," Bidziel confessed as they walked toward their first meeting. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make everything worse?" Catherine took her daughter's hand, the first time she had touched her since that day by the river 15 years ago. "Just be yourself. Tell them what you told me about your people, about the land, about what the Apache need to survive. Your truth is more powerful than any fancy words." Their first meeting was with the territorial secretary, a stern man named Henderson, who seemed inclined to dismiss them before they even spoke. But as Bidziel began to talk, first hesitantly, then with growing confidence, something changed in his expression. She didn't speak like the savage Indians he had heard about in government reports. She spoke like an educated woman who understood complex political and social issues. She knew the names of government officials, the details of various treaties, the economic realities facing both Apache and white communities. "You're suggesting a compromise," Secretary Henderson said when Bidziel finished her proposal. "A partial relocation that would allow some bands to remain in traditional territories while others move to designated areas with better resources, other than San Carlos." "Yes," Bidziel said, "and a formal role for people like me. People who can speak both languages, understand both cultures. We could help prevent the misunderstandings that lead to violence." Henderson was quiet for a long moment. "This would require approval from Washington. It's not the kind of simple solution the government prefers." "Simple solutions haven't worked," Catherine interjected. "The current policy is creating more problems, not solving them. Fighting is expensive. War hurts everyone." Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine and Bidziel met with dozens of officials, journalists, and community leaders. Some were hostile, some were indifferent, but a surprising number were genuinely interested in hearing alternatives to the current failed policies. The breakthrough came during a meeting with the editor of the Phoenix Herald, a man named Thomas Wright, who had been writing increasingly critical articles about government Indian policy. "I want to publish your story," he told Bidziel after hearing her presentation. "Not just your political proposals, but your personal story. The white woman, raised by Apache, now trying to prevent a war. People need to understand that this conflict isn't inevitable." Bidziel was hesitant. "My story is not just mine, it belongs to my Apache family too." "Which is exactly why it needs to be told," Wright pressed. "You're living proof that the two cultures can coexist, can even strengthen each other." The article, when it appeared, created a sensation. The sacred song, "A Bridge Between Worlds," ran on the front page, complete with a photograph of Bidziel in traditional Apache dress and Catherine in her best town clothes, standing together in front of the territorial capitol building. The story spread beyond Phoenix. Newspapers in California, Colorado, and even back east picked it up. For the first time, many Americans were reading about Apache people as individuals rather than as faceless enemies. They were learning about their sophisticated culture, their deep spiritual connection to the land, their desperate struggle to maintain their way of life in the face of overwhelming pressure. But the article also brought unexpected consequences. 3 days after it was published, a knock came at the door of Catherine's hotel room. When she opened it, she found a well-dressed woman with familiar blue eyes and light brown hair. "Are you Catherine O'Brien?" the woman asked. "Yes," Catherine replied, cautiously. "My name is Margaret Sullivan. I think you might be my sister." Catherine stared at the woman, her mind reeling. Your sister? I saw the newspaper article about you and your daughter. It mentioned that your maiden name was Catherine Sullivan, that you came from County Cork in Ireland. I've been searching for my sister Catherine for 20 years. She disappeared during the famine, and I always hoped. Catherine's knees went weak. Margaret, her little sister Margaret, who had been only 12 when they were separated during the terrible journey from Ireland. Catherine had searched for her when she first arrived in America, but had eventually given up hope. Maggie? She whispered. Little Maggie Sullivan? The sisters fell into each other's arms, both crying. After all these years of believing she had no family left in the world, Catherine suddenly found herself surrounded by relatives she had thought were lost forever. Margaret had married well, had children and grandchildren. She lived in San Francisco, now, but she had never stopped looking for her missing sister. You have to come home with me, Margaret insisted. Meet your nieces and nephews. Let them know their Aunt Catherine. But Catherine looked toward Bidzil, who had been watching this reunion with complex emotions. I can't leave now. My daughter needs me. Your daughter, Margaret said, studying Bidzil with interest. Seems like a remarkable young woman who can take care of herself. Bidzil stepped forward. She's right, she said to Catherine. You've spent 15 years punishing yourself for what happened to me. Now you have a chance to reconnect with family, to have the life you gave up. You should take it. But what about your work here? What about the Apache situation? We'll continue with or without you, Bidzil said gently. You've helped me learn to navigate the white world. Now I can do it alone when I need to. Catherine looked back and forth between her birth daughter and her sister. After decades of isolation and guilt, she suddenly had more family than she knew what to do with. What if, she said slowly, we found a way to do both? Margaret, how would you feel about a visit to Apache country? And Bidzil, would you be willing to travel to California sometime to meet your aunt and cousins?